I'm ready, I
All
think.
right, Mary says she's ready. So we have a big treat for you guys today as we welcome back Mary to the Cross Council podcast. Mary, how you doing?
Hey, well, I'm excited to be back here. I mean, I just saw you Monday, so it's not like I've gone anywhere. But on the podcast, yeah, I haven't been involved for a while, so it's kind of fun to be here again.
So we do get to see each other at staff meetings and we're
Mhm.
still connected even though you're not on the podcast. And
Right.
and I probably should say too, the last podcast and this podcast, I apologize in advance. I am on drugs and a knee
For
replacement
sure.
and only 2 weeks out from that. So doing what I can. I'm operating at, 8% capacity, but gives me a chance to rest a little bit and recalibrate and to let Jenny maybe earn more jewels in her crown as she serves me.
Oh man. I love you, Jenny.
So as we were in the staff meeting, it was just hours after the shooting in Madison occurred. So obviously that's life altering for those people and for those of us who are connected to that school. Really, really painful. And we're not as connected as we used to be. But as we were talking about that just real briefly, I mean, you just kind of nailed it in the staff meeting. You said the answer to all of our problems ultimately comes down to receiving experiential truth from Jesus. And I think
Right.
that's the essence of our ministry. And it's not just that logical stuff. It's those places where he wants to reform us, reshape us, transform us. And so I just wanted to give you the platform to expand on what you were saying in the staff meeting so that everybody who listens can hear your heart on that.
Well, it's really our friendship with this. And because he is truth, he is the truth. We receive truth from him when we engage in that friendship. But I just so many difficult things happen in all of our lives. But I even thought about, you know, as I was growing up, I grew up Catholic and my dad was we were a German family. And so he was a little bit stoic and he rarely gave advice or interjected into our adult lives. But I remember one time, several of my siblings and I, there were 10 of us, so there were plenty to argue about things. We were all sitting around talking just about all these problems, right? And my dad walks up and he has written on a piece of paper, he just tore out. I think he was hearing us and he wrote Jesus on a piece of paper and tore it out of the book that he was the notebook he was holding. And he just walked up to me while we're having all these arguments and handed it to me. Just so simple. Like, why are you guys discussing all this? The answer is Jesus. The
Hmm.
answer is he has the answer. You should be talking to him and not to each other. And it just, I was reminded of that recently, just how simple he wants life to be when we lean on him with everything.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, that was just as we were talking in staff meeting, I was thinking, he wants to be there for the big things, of course, always, but even the small things that we go through every day, just the small struggles we go through. If he's a friend, which obviously he is, what would we say when we met for lunch with a friend? What would
Hmm.
we tell them? Right? We tell them
Hmm.
about the simple things that are going on in our lives, kids that are struggling in school, or, an issue you have in your marriage, or a fear about being able to pay for something, tuition or whatever it is, just things that are part of all of our lives that Jesus wants to be that person for.
Hmm.
And not even just to talk to him about it, which is amazing that he's always there to hear, but he actually, if we give him the opportunity, he actually wants to talk back,
Hmm.
like not a monologue. He wants to actually bring his perspective to the situation. And so not only do we get comfort knowing he's there, but he actually can change the way we perceive what we're going through. And it brings life change, even more than what a friend could do. So he's there for everything. He's there for all the things. He's our, you know, like I always think about this time of year, Emmanuel is God with us. He is with us always for everything, in everything. So,
Yeah, and during this time of year, as we come upon Christmas, it's that idea of that incarnation and that He is with
mhm,
us, right? The
right.
incarnation, I think that the church should be much more in tune with what that really means, because there's an idea in the Old Testament of being a friend of God, but boy, you talk about the exponential leap when Jesus chose to put skin on and walk amongst us, right? Because he, like you're saying, he doesn't stand distant or aloof from our struggles, but he comes near in his love and in his presence when we're open, right? And whether it's him talking back to us or however he communicates, for me, there's times where it's like, oh, that circumstance, he must have orchestrated that, or there was some
Hmm.
wisdom in what happened there. And it's not necessarily talking, but it's us being in tune and observing um, how he's working. It's that idea
Right,
of being tuned in because he does. He invites us into a relationship that transforms, not just
right.
educates, right?
Hmm.
Um, and it's not because we've earned anything, but he actually delights in us. And that's easy to say, but I think when we slow
Hmm.
down and think, wow, does God really delight in us? That's a
Hmm.
huge jump for some people.
Yeah. And I think that may be an easier concept for me to even think about or understand, after we've done so many times of having him interact into our experience and bring his perspective, the way he brings it is just so loving, and it's humorous at times, and it's playful at times.
Hmm.
It's not like thus says, okay, I'm going to tell you. It's like one of my memories, he actually came, I saw him in that memory, um, just affirming the fact that I didn't know how to use the beaters, we called them, the mixer, hand mixer. He
Hmm.
was just playing with it with me. It
Mm.
brought so much truth and peace into that place that he was there, and that he was okay with what happened, that I wasn't, a failure or whatever I felt like at the time as a little girl. So, yeah, just that friendship developing with him as we interact with him in that way is really how it happens.
Hmm.
You can read a book about a person but not feel love and friendship from them unless you're actually, the author, and you're experiencing that person. So, yeah, the incarnation, so amazing. And even as you're talking, I'm thinking, we always sit all the grandkids down at Christmas time and we go through the Christmas story, but um, it just like a light bulb went off as you were talking,
Mm.
that it's not just about the story of what he did. It's about that God became man so that we could know him. So the baby in the manger, it's not just the story of the birth of Jesus, it's the reason he did this. And I don't think we've explained that
Mm.
very well to our
Mm.
grandkids. Most of them are little,
Mm.
that's actually why he did this. It's not just, isn't that cool, baby Jesus. No, it's because he's God with us. He
Mm.
came to be with us so we could know him and we could see the Father and the Father's heart. Like, if the Father was here right now, this is what he would do. That was Jesus's life, because of course he saw the Father doing it and then he did it. So, I mean, that just blows my mind when I think about that.
Mm.
If God the Father was here in this moment, and this thing that I experienced that I knew was God, that tells me who the Father is, that he would do it
Mm.
and he would be that way. Anyway,
For
I
sure,
wrote a
for
note
sure.
so I can remember to do that when we're talking to our grandkids.
There you go. Yeah, and it's amazing just the more that we're open to understanding the depth of what extent that the Lord went to in becoming flesh,
Mhm.
but even his provision. And I don't know why I've never connected the dots on this, but in the sermon Sunday, and we talk about, you know, um, the nativity scene. And it really isn't accurate, right? The wise men probably didn't
Right,
show up for months after. That's fine, no big
right.
deal. I'm not gonna,
Hmm.
but that the gold, the frankincense, and the myrrh, I've just always thought of,
Yeah,
okay, they brought those. That's cool. But Mary
yeah.
and Joseph were
Hmm.
probably really poor,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
And so they parlayed that into provision. That was not
Hmm.
just in honor of this is the coming king. This is who we've been looking for
Right.
as these people. But not only is it a thing of honor, but it was a thing of care and provision and how they used that to provide for Jesus as he grew up. And who
Right.
knows how they shared that even with their community as well. So just to
Hmm.
know that, he came to walk among us. Every breath that we take in his presence. And there's
Hmm.
nothing mundane. There's no such thing as a mundane moment, really, when you have that perspective that he's with us,
Right.
and I love how Jenny says this. It's like he sees me.
Hmm.
And that's even with Mary and
Hmm.
Joseph. I see you.
Right.
I've brought you this far. So we are seeing our life has meaning. It's one thing to say it, it's another thing to be able to really capture that and take that all in.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, how precious that, first of all, that they trusted the Father, that they're making this journey. They don't know what's going to happen. They don't know what this means, this baby that they're having. And then they're asked to leave because of
Mm,
Herod wanting to kill all the babies. And having that provision already, you know, to live for how many years in Egypt that they had to live. It's just fascinating to me, the trust that they had in the Father, and how he met them every step, right? I mean, he was
right,
growing them in their relationship with him too, right?
right, right.
They weren't perfect anything.
Hmm.
Um, they were just people
Right.
that were scared at times and worried at times and all of that.
Right. And even
So,
when he's 12 years old and he disappears for a couple of days, right? It shows that too. Like, yeah, they're real people, right?
right.
But yeah, and Jesus, he doesn't avoid sin or brokenness. He steps right into the pain of humanity to bring his healing.
Hmm.
And it's just such a good reminder that Jesus isn't repelled by our messes, right? He moves toward us. He offers truth and grace where there's lies, with these wounds
Hmm.
that have taken root. And I go back to my first session where
Hmm.
there was this thing that happened with my sister, and we end up getting on the school bus. I won't go into the whole thing, but I remember being almost happy that my sister was the focus of attention because she had slipped on the ice, and then just the truth-based guilt that I felt, and like, oh my gosh, what a terrible thing that I did, and I sensed Jesus. Just a picture that I got was Jesus on the bus with his one arm toward my sister, one arm toward me. And as Mr. Bible guy, Mr. Moody Bible Institute ordained guy, I'm waiting for like some sermon from Jesus, and he didn't say a word. It was just this picture with his arms out, and it was this very real idea that I'm with you. I
Hmm.
see both of you. And it just crushed me. I'm like, oh, this stuff is real because it was my first step into the melt process. So he is
Hmm.
there. He assures us that we're never alone, that he's with us, not just theoretically.
Right. Yeah. And I think some of my early sessions also were um, not so much like a profound truth that he brought me,
Mm,
but just picturing him and actually experiencing. I could feel in my heart the experience I was having with him as he entered into some of those really lonely, painful places that I'd had as a little kid. Being ignored, being neglected, which is, you can imagine in a family that big,
hmm
happened all every day.
hmm
Just coming and being there and just sensing him there, the relief that that brought, and the peace that that brought, and the sense of, I'm not alone. Because when you believe that you're all alone deep down, you tend to overcompensate for that.
mm,
And you work super hard to try to work out everything all by yourself. And it's a big burden, and there's a lot of stress and anxiety that can come with that. And I was feeling all of that when I first started getting ministry 25 almost years ago. And just the sense of him being there. I think he'll interact with us at whatever level we're willing to open our hearts. You know, it could just
Hmm.
be in a moment. Like I remember one time driving my kids to school and stopping in a light and just having this sense, look at your calendar. Because I had a calendar written, you know, a spiral thing, and I kept it tucked in the between the seats in the car. So I'm sitting at the light and I'm just thinking, And I look at the calendar and I realize I've got a doctor's appointment. I'd forgotten all about that day when I dropped my kids off. I was supposed to go. And I just looked at that and I just, I thought this is like I think I'd been probably involved with transformational prayer maybe 6 months. I barely even understood anything, but God started interacting with me just like that, just as a friend, because I acknowledged him, right? Acknowledge him in all our ways, and he'll direct our paths. So he literally that day
Mm.
directed my path because I acknowledged in that moment, okay, God, was that you? So that there's so many simple things like that that happen. But then there's, the everyday issues we face. Like I know early on, I had um, I was married not to Wes, but to my kid's father, and things were very stressful for the 14 years we were married.
Mm.
And just seeing God interact with me in some of those places that happen to all of us, feeling unappreciated as a spouse, seeing all the things that were going on in my life, and having my husband not be there, right? Not be
Hmm.
there for
Hmm.
a couple dates. Sometimes he'd disappear and I wouldn't know where he was. And things, very unstable things were happening. And and I remember talking to the Lord even before I understood about the melt process at all, or transformational prayer at all. I think I'd only been a believer about maybe 3 or 4 years at this time. Just feeling the fear of all of that happening in our family, and just being afraid that that because he didn't see how hard it was for me, because he didn't appreciate all that I was doing, because I didn't feel supported at all, which I know a lot of women can relate to that, even in a good marriage, right? In a
Mm.
good marriage, you
Hmm.
feel those things sometimes. And just being willing to sit and talk to Jesus about that. And for me, that meant just crying my eyes out after the kids went to bed and just asking, what is this about? Why am I so upset with him? I want to be a good wife, but I feel so unappreciated, so not seen. And then going to memories of a little kid and just being doing nice things for my mom, and her not noticing because she was so swamped, and
Mm.
feeling so like it's hopeless. No matter what I do, it isn't going to change anything. And just having the Lord come to that place in my life and intersect, well, he's already there, but for me to open that up to him, and for him to talk to me about that he saw me, that he saw my heart, you know, just they sound like such simple things, but they actually, those kind of encounters with him really began to change me. And
Mm.
the feelings that I had toward my husband began to calm down, those negative things. And he didn't necessarily change, but it just didn't, those things didn't bother me anymore because I knew the Lord saw me. And to me, it's so interesting that the Word of God tells us all of this, right?
Right.
It tells us to cast our cares on Him and He will care for us. But what does that mean, that He'll
Mm.
care for us? What does that mean?
Mm.
Does that mean I pray and I ask Him, for whatever I need, and then hope that something changes? Which I'm not saying prayer doesn't change things, because it does. But what does it mean that He cares for us? For
Mm.
me, it was actually like a best friend coming in and binding up those wounds that I had and transforming me in just the simple things of everyday life that I faced. And that's the beauty of him wanting to be involved and being involved, actually, even though we don't recognize it, being involved in everything that we do. Like Psalm 139, I love
Hmm.
how it says, my coming in, my going out, my sitting down, my rising up, my thoughts, all of it. I think we forget that sometimes when our emotions get all stirred up, we forget, oh, he's right here.
Hmm.
And I can talk to him. And even more, maybe I can spend a few hours with him and have him help me see why these feelings I'm having, why they're so troubling. Simple stuff. And yet when he brings his perspective, how profound it can be, the change that we feel inside us, just from receiving that from him.
Yeah, it's a theme for me over and over. Like I want to be playing the long game. Not that I'm that great at it, but the long game means that you have to attend to some of the small things. And I read a book by an astronaut that said sweat the small stuff, which is just the opposite of what the world says. It's like, I don't sweat the small stuff.
Right.
When you actually sweat the small stuff, when you take account of what's going on, what is it that bothers me? Oh, maybe
Hmm.
there's more to that because when people reach out for help, there's been numerous people that say, well, this isn't about my childhood. It's about what's going on right now.
I know.
And we just want to
Yeah.
try to do a better job of clarifying that message. Well, in a sense, you're right. It's not about your childhood. It's what you picked
Mhm.
up in your childhood. And so many people say, well, I
Yes.
grew up in a Christian home.
Yes.
Well, okay. Do you know how many people leave, who walk away from God who've grown up in Christian homes? So it's just
Yes.
not that idea of growing up in Christian homes. There are so many different things. The enemy is set up with so much more of an advantage because he has the whole realm of falsehood. Truth is very narrow,
Mm.
and it's
Hmm.
so much easier for us to interpret life through the lens of distortion, which
Mm.
creates the pain when we buy into those lies.
Yeah.
I think of certain things that would bother me. I'm not all the way there yet, but let's say that I'm just working on something in the garage and I drop something. There are so many times now in the last couple of years where I'm like, oh, well, I just have to pick it up and clean it up. But in the past, I would beat myself up over and over, like, "Oh, you were so
Mm.
stupid. I can't believe that you dropped it. Would you pay more attention?" Yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
And I think some of the memories that I went to may have mentioned this before too, but my first year in Little League, where I struck out. We were down by like, I don't know, 10, 20 runs. I don't know. It was ridiculous. And I struck out and
Yikes.
making the last out. Like but I said,
Oh no.
after I struck out, I'm like, oh, I lost the game because I made the
Right.
last out. It was the only time that I got in the game. I think I probably played I think you had to play 3 of the 6 innings. Probably
Mm.
didn't have a ball hit to me. There was a huge span of age, right? So I was the youngest kid on the team or one of the youngest kids on the team. I strike out, we lose by all that, but I took it on that it's my fault. I'm bad.
Right.
I failed.
Hmm.
And Jesus just made it so clear. And it wasn't anything like I didn't know in my logical mind, because my logical mind would say, well, good grief, you made the last out. It was just one out. There were all these other things that happened, all these other errors that, whatever. But it just settled in my heart in such a beautiful way that it was like, oh, I'm good now.
Yeah.
And so the emotional heart belief lined up with the logical. And there's another memory that I went to where we had to stand up in front of the class and read a portion of whatever we were reading. And I kept rubbing my nose, or like it was just sort of, I don't know what I was doing, right? But I was just like trying to stay focused on the reading. And I sat down and my friend just started rubbing his nose, like side of his face, right near his nose. And I'm like, dude, thanks for nothing. And I was just so angry and like,
Wow.
but again, in that place, just believing that I was insignificant, I don't matter, that this guy that was my only really good friend in that class, and we sat next to each other every day, that seemed like a betrayal. He's just kind of being a goofball, but boy, that thing stung. And Jesus removed the knife that was in my heart. And I think that's contributed. So it doesn't have to be these horrible, awful, abusive memories. Of course,
Right.
we deal with highly traumatic things, but it's also these little things, the everyday things that I know that you really want to put an emphasis on as well, that have contributed
Hmm.
to how tangled we are in our mind and how we have this
Hmm.
distorted lens of how we look at life.
Right. And I know some things that um, I didn't think were a very big deal, some
Mm,
emotions that I would feel, especially over time as I took more and more things to Jesus, like the big, huge reservoirs of pain started going away. And it was more simpler, like just whiffs of inadequacy or other things I would feel or sense. Sometimes I found that those things that didn't seem to be a big deal were profound transformation moments. Isn't that crazy?
hmm
I had pushed it off thinking, this is silly that every time I walk into a room full of people, like a business meeting, I immediately feel anxious. So what? I sit down, we start talking, everything's good. But then when I finally looked at that and let myself feel it, boy, what a big difference it made when Jesus came and he brought truth into the memories that were connected to that feeling. And the feeling being gone, that bad feeling is great, but the things that he told me that took that feeling away, I mean, those are like gold
hmm
because in that situation I don't remember exactly what he said, but it would have been something about my value and how he saw me and how he loved me. And of course anything that he brings to our spirit and those memories, it translates into our current life.
hmm
So if that little girl that got healing back when I was growing up receives truth, it's the same truth I live out of now.
mm
And so now I know him in that way, and I'm closer to him too, because I took the time to let him speak into that.
mm.
So I just really, I guess, want to emphasize to people that we do have a friend in Jesus. And he's not just expecting us to learn his word, and that's beautiful, and I would never trade that for anything, but he wants a personal relationship. He wants to speak into everything we're going through and bring clarification, to bring, this is how I see this, because the way he sees it is reality,
hmm
right? We're the
hmm
ones that are deceived.
Right.
He has the reality of the situation and how it really looks. If we were able to peel back the lies and the deceptions of this world, we would see it the way he sees it. And then there would be peace there. And so, of course, he wants that for us and for our kids in every situation.
hmm
So, just let him be your friend. I think that's just so important. And
Right.
obviously the greatest commandment, right, is to
Right.
love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. You know, that takes a two-way street, right? You just can't love him that way when you have not experienced him.
And I would say even let him be a little bit more of a friend today than he was yesterday. Instead of
Mm-hmm.
just a black, well, I don't know. I'll
Yeah,
just, okay, now just take a little step. Just crack the door open a little bit more.
yeah,
Because the more that we do that, instead of just an either or, and I know you're not saying that, but I think it's helpful just to kind of be a little bit more detailed in that because he really does want to win us over, persuade us of the truth, because it is in those formative years where those deeply held heart beliefs become cemented.
yeah,
And he wants to, I guess, take those lies that are deeply embedded in the cement and just reshape us, extract those and fill with his truth. So
mm-hmm.
yeah, that's where those things uh, originate. And how big does a pebble have to be in your shoe for it to bother you?
Right. Mm-hmm.
It can be minuscule and still just create this pain. And just to be aware, like a lot of people come and say, well, I'm a perfectionist. I'm like, well, first off, let's not equate your identity with your
Yeah.
behavior, right? And I ask people, what's at the root of perfectionism? Well, and a lot of people don't have much of an answer, but it really, at the very core
Mm-hmm.
of perfectionism is fear, which is rooted in what they believe. But they want to think that it's just their part, that's just part of their personality. They're just a perfectionist, or they
Yeah.
have to be in order to receive something. But the more they go in that journey with Jesus and start exploring those things that are tied to the perfectionism,
Hmm.
they might find that, as an example, perfectionism might be connected to a way to earn approval or avoid criticism as they were
Hmm.
growing up. Like, yeah, who doesn't want approval or who likes criticism, right? The two ends of the spectrum. So again, other places, there's so many places where we can get distorted in how we process the world and interact with others as adults. And yeah, whether it's going into a meeting as an adult or how you're just living your life, or what your house looks like or what kind of car that you
Hmm.
drive, how much
Right.
of that is tied to, oh, people are going to like me more because I have this or
Hmm.
I'm doing this.
Yeah. People who do things with excellence, it's really interesting to me that it's all about how do you feel when you do it.
Mm,
So a perfectionist will feel driven to make it just right and to make sure that it's perfect. And it doesn't seem like how much you do really ever seems like you've done enough. And you have some stress over that and some fear over that versus, and one example of getting free of that is when the Lord helped me to get free of my hatred for housework. Because of the way my mother had treated us and
mm,
treated the girls, especially in our family, and the shame I had over it because I always failed and I never did it good enough. And so I dreaded even doing it. Right. And this was all like tapes in the background. I never
mm,
even realized that's why I avoided, or I did like a um, very halfway job of it, of
mm,
cleaning things. And it was
mm-hmm,
because of what had happened as a kid. And so when the Lord came and he actually showed me a blanket and it had all these jewels all over it. This is in one of the memories with my mom that he
mm,
interacted with me. And he said, I've entrusted all of these things to you. I've given these things to you to take care of. And I realized the house that I lived in, that I owned, was one of those things.
mm,
And it so changed the way I looked at it. And I mean, I seriously got excited about doing housework because now I knew this is a beautiful, obviously, it was a beautiful home that he had given me, and he gave it to me to be a good steward of it. It just like a light switch changed the way that I looked at doing housework.
mm,
So my motivation for working hard and making it excellent totally changed
mm,
from the shame part of it, those emotions, to an excitement about doing it. So for perfectionist people, check what your feelings are as you do that. Do you feel a joy in being excellent? And if it turns out that it doesn't isn't quite as good as you wanted it to be, are you able to go, well, it's okay. I
mm-hmm.
did my best. It's not a big deal, or do you beat yourself up over that? So it's all about, the heart motivation, and your emotions will show you pretty clearly if you pay attention, what your heart motivation is in that. So those are just, you know, for all you women out here who hate doing housework, you might stop and just pay attention to why, because I'm pretty sure there's going to be some stuff attached to that.
Yeah, I mean, I can relate to that with, I had a dad that could take a car apart and put it back together again. And that was
Mm-hmm.
not something that he spent a whole lot of time teaching us to do. And so I'm not super handy. I can get along.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that there was something even deeper there. It was just like, I can't do it kind of thing, a conclusion
Mm-hmm.
that I came to. And
Yeah.
now you also have the excuse, like I don't have the excuse now with YouTube because you can go to YouTube and you can figure stuff out. But
Right.
there's even less of a hitch. I think if I wouldn't have gone to some of those places and even some places with my dad where he wasn't as patient as I bet he would have wanted to be, the
Mm-hmm.
more the garbage in those places started to get removed, I have less of a hitch in going to YouTube and going, okay, I'll figure this out. Now there's some stuff where I'm like, oh, buddy, can you come over and can you help me do this, this, or this? Because I don't have a problem with that. And I have friends who, we love each other and we help each other where we can. But I don't have nearly the resistance to trying certain things. I'm sort of set up to be a problem solver. I really like solving problems, but when it
Mm.
came to certain issues, I'm like, yeah, I think I'm just gonna put that off for another year or two. But I don't have that nearly to the degree that I used to have.
Yeah. All of these things that we're talking about, Steve, they, you know, people may be thinking, what's the big deal? Like all of the stuff you're talking about, so what?
Hmm.
You know, but freedom from these things feels really good. Freedom feels good. Living in freedom from all that negative emotion swirling around all the time and the hundreds of tapes that we have in there that tell us lies about who we are and what we can do and all of that, as those tapes get removed by the truth of God, man, freedom comes. And just it's hard to describe what freedom is like, right? It encompasses so many different facets of our life where we have freedom to have closer relationships, more energy to do things, more excitement about things, less fear, more love. The list goes on. It does matter. Freedom is what Jesus died to give us, freedom and liberty. And it's very important to him that we know who he is. So we know what a friend he is and that he has freedom for us. So, especially over the holidays, I think people definitely feel a lot of the emotional stuff swirling around. And, let next year be a more joyful Christmas
Mm.
by giving time to him to be more of a friend in your life, to help you to get his perspective on some of these things and bring healing and truth in your life.
Thanks for joining us on the Cross Counsel podcast. Keep pursuing transformation with a courageous heart, open to what only he can do. There are many ways to get involved. Pray for us, consider supporting us, share these podcasts, and if you haven't already, take the step to jump in yourself. We'll see you next time.